There was once an image that stirred the heart of an entire nation. A soldier, solemn in uniform, standing before his people, raising his arm and vowing to protect them from fear, from bloodshed, from the collapse of trust. That soldier was Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba. In January 2022, he led a coup d'état, overthrowing the democratically elected president, declaring it was necessary because the government had failed to guarantee national security. He rose to power, welcomed by the people as a beacon of hope, and watched closely by the international community as a soldier of transition. But just 8 months later, he was overthrown by fellow soldiers for the exact reason he once claimed he would fix. This raises a painful question. How does a man who earned the people's trust in the name of national protection lose it all in less than a year? And beyond that, why is it that another soldier, younger, less known, less bold in his words, could rise up and be called by millions our last hope? The story between Damiba and Ibrahim Traoré is not just a tale of power. It is the contrast between promise and action, between facade and truth, between title and the will of the people. Subscribe now to Ibrahim Traoré Biography. Because here, you won't hear sanitized headlines. You'll hear stories that are real, raw, and painful enough to awaken conscience. And now, let's return to January 2022, where a coup began with applause and ended in silent darkness. In January 2022, as Burkina Faso was gripped by chaos, with a wave of jihadist violence spreading, the army demoralized, and the people drowning in fear and despair, Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba emerged as a savior in uniform. He wasn't a politician, nor was he an elected leader. He was a senior military officer, stepping out from the ranks with a decisive message. We must intervene because the current government can no longer guarantee the security of the nation. And with that single declaration, President Marc Christian Kabore and Prime Minister Lassina Zerbo were arrested. The civilian government was dissolved, the constitution was suspended, the nation held its breath, then erupted in applause, celebration, and the appearance of Russian flags in the crowd. It was a signal. The people no longer trusted the West. They no longer trusted the old regime. They trusted the soldier. They trusted Damiba. They believed he would do what his predecessor could not: defeat terrorism and restore peace. On January 31, 2022, Damiba was appointed interim president. He established the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, promising to restore order, rebuild the military, and eventually return power to a civilian government. The people nodded in approval. The army followed. The international community watched cautiously, but remained silent. Damiba became a new symbol, a soldier entering politics with the posture of a healer, cutting out the cancer of terrorism and healing a wounded nation. But no one expected that, from his very first steps, this old soldier would begin to rebuild the very system he had just torn down. And when he appointed himself Minister of Defense, consolidating the two highest positions in the country, whispers began to circulate through the barracks. He didn't come to heal. He came to claim the throne. The collapse of trust, when Damiba became the overthrown. When a soldier takes power, people don't expect him to speak like a politician. They expect him to do what politicians never dared to. But Damiba forgot that, just a few months after assuming office, the system he had vowed to clean up began to look exactly like the old one. The military still lacked ammunition. Villages were still being attacked. Militants continued expanding their control. And Damiba, still signing appointments, reshuffling cabinets, and delivering speeches. By September 2022, a shocking figure was released. Over 40% of Burkina Faso's territory was out of government control. Soldiers in the north, where the bloodshed was greatest, began to whisper, "He's no different than the last one. We placed our trust in the wrong man." On September 12, in a hasty move, Damiba dismissed the Minister of Defense and appointed himself to the position. But this decision didn't inspire new confidence. It only deepened the sense that he was consolidating power, not preparing for battle. In the barracks, the young officers, the ones truly fighting on the front lines, no longer wanted to take orders from the capital. They weren't rebellious, they were exhausted. They no longer wanted to defend the nation under a man who had forgotten what defense truly meant. Then came September 30th, 2022. A moment when history turned on its heels. Ibrahim Traoré, a young captain, quiet, unassuming, but deeply respected by the troops, led a coup, no bloodshed, no drawn-out conflict. Just a clear, simple statement: we no longer have confidence in Damiba's ability to lead the nation. The man who once overthrew was now overthrown. The man who once promised security was now removed for losing it. A cruel circle, but an inevitable result of unfulfilled promises. And the strangest part, the people didn't mourn Damiba. They took to the streets again, but this time, they didn't wave Russian flags. They held up photos of one man. A man who stood not for power, but because he could no longer bear to see his country abandoned. Transfer of power, not through bullets, but through dialogue. Some coups are launched for power, but some are carried out simply to put an end to a broken promise. When Ibrahim Traoré and his comrades took control, they didn't hold grand announcements. They didn't set up barricades or blare loudspeakers to challenge the world. They released a single, brief message, cold, calm, but heavy with meaning: Damiba has failed. We cannot continue down a road that has led us to the edge of the abyss. But Damiba was not ready to let go. Intelligence sources reported he had fled to the Camboinsan military base, where French troops were stationed. Immediately, a wave of public outrage erupted. Many accused Damiba of seeking French support to launch a counter-coup, possibly dragging the country into a new civil war. Now, Ibrahim Traoré stood at a crossroads. Option 1: end it swiftly with force. Option 2: take the path few in history ever choose. A transfer of power made not with bullets, but with words. And he chose the second. He made a public statement: I do not believe France is involved, and I do not believe that justice requires revenge. We only ask that Damiba steps down peacefully, because the people have already suffered enough war. Religious and community leaders were brought in to mediate. On October 2, 2022, in a private negotiation, Damiba agreed to resign, but he posed 7 conditions, including protection of his life and personal interests, no prosecution of his allies, respect for the ICAO's agreement to restore democracy within 2 years. Ibrahim Traoré accepted, not out of weakness, but because he understood. True victory isn't about defeating your enemy. It's about restoring faith in a people who had lost all hope. Damiba departed the country, going into exile in Togo. No executions, no blood spilled on the streets, only a quiet transfer of power. That echoed louder than any explosion. For the first time, a soldier did the right thing, even when he had the power to do otherwise. He didn't seize power to rule, but to restore responsibility. Ibrahim Traoré didn't appear on national television to bask in post-coup glory. He didn't wave flags. He didn't declare victory. He didn't take the podium with a politician's smile. Instead, he stood silently among his fellow soldiers and said a single sentence that brought many to tears: I don't want to be head of state. I just can't go on living as a soldier in a country where the people are left unprotected. At a time when most coups are about seizing power, Traoré became the exception. He didn't fight to become king. He fought to return responsibility to the very institution that had forgotten its oath. To protect the people. Immediately after taking over, Traoré didn't purge the cabinet. He didn't hunt down Damiba's supporters. Instead, he did 3 things, none of them political theater. 1. He upheld Damiba's promise to ICAOs to return the country to civilian rule within 2 years. 2. He redeployed the army to neglected regions, rebuilding trust among villagers. 3. He opened direct channels of communication with frontline soldiers, ensuring that every decision from the capital reflected real conditions on the ground. The people began to call him the captain of the people, not because of his title, but because he didn't talk much. He simply did what needed to be done. He didn't chant ideologies. He didn't blame his predecessor. He simply said, I don't need praise. I just want the people near our borders to know they have not been forgotten. In an era when trust in government feels like a luxury, Ibrahim Traoré didn't offer promises, he offered action. And that, more than media appearances or speeches, transformed him from an unknown captain into a symbol of leadership built not on publicity, but on trust earned through sacrifice. One was overthrown for failure, one is honored for responsibility. To soldiers, to coups, to promises, almost identical. Protect the nation, restore security, return trust to the people. But one failed, and the other is still carrying hope forward. Damiba had the rank, the power, and the media. But he lost the one thing that mattered most, the trust of his soldiers, and the faith of the people he swore to protect. He became isolated, alone in the government he had built. And in the end, he left in silence. Ibrahim Traoré, on the other hand, had no high title, no backing from powerful factions, but he possessed something few ever hold on to. A responsibility he refused to abandon. When no one else dared to carry the burden, he carried it. When no one else spoke, he spoke. And when his country needed him, he didn't wait for permission. He acted. The people don't need someone who speaks well. They need someone who listens, who acts, and who keeps their word. This wasn't a line from a political speech. It was a truth from the people themselves. We are not here to glorify a coup. We are here to remember this. In the darkest moments, there will always be someone who dares to rise, not to be a hero, but to be the one who keeps the promise everyone else forgot. If you've ever lived in a country wounded by broken promises, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you once trusted, if you've ever believed that no one had the courage to live with truth anymore, then remember this. The truth always finds someone to stand for it, and sometimes, that someone is not a politician, but a soldier who knows pain, who knows how to think, and who knows how to keep his word. Subscribe now to Ibrahim Traoré Biography, a place where you don't just follow history, but live through the rawest lessons of responsibility, leadership, and honor. There was once an image that stirred the heart of an entire nation. A soldier, solemn in uniform, standing before his people, raising his arm and vowing to protect them from fear, from bloodshed, from the collapse of trust. That soldier was Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba. In January 2022, he led a coup d'état, overthrowing the democratically elected president, declaring it was necessary because the government had failed to guarantee national security. He rose to power, welcomed by the people as a beacon of hope, and watched closely by the international community as a soldier of transition. But just 8 months later, he was overthrown by fellow soldiers for the exact reason he once claimed he would fix. This raises a painful question. How does a man who earned the people's trust in the name of national protection lose it all in less than a year? And beyond that, why is it that another soldier, younger, less known, less bold in his words, could rise up and be called by millions our last hope? The story between Damiba and Ibrahim Traoré is not just a tale of power. It is the contrast between promise and action, between facade and truth, between title and the will of the people. Subscribe now to Ibrahim Traoré Biography, because here, you won't hear sanitized headlines. You'll hear stories that are real, raw, and painful enough to awaken conscience. And now, let's return to January 2022, where a coup began with applause and ended in silent darkness.